Prince Zephyr stood at the edge of the crystal balcony, his massive wings folded against his scaled back. The golden spires of the draconian capital stretched endlessly below him, but he felt no desire to soar among them. At 25 years old, he was the only dragon in the Empire's history who refused to fly. The shame burned in his chest like acid. Every dragon learned to fly before their 5th birthday. It was as natural as breathing, as instinctive as roaring, yet here he was, heir to the most powerful throne in the galaxy, earthbound like a common lizard. "Your Highness," came a soft voice behind him. Zephyr didn't turn around. He knew it was Marcus, his personal advisor, arriving with more bad news about his reputation. "The Emperor requests your presence in the throne room," Marcus continued, his voice careful and respectful. "The human delegation has arrived." Zephyr's golden eyes narrowed. Humans, the weakest species in the known galaxy. They had no scales to protect them, no fire to defend themselves, no wings to escape danger. They were so fragile that a single dragon's roar could shatter their bones. Yet somehow they had managed to build an empire that rivaled even the dragons. "Let me guess," Zephyr said, his voice deep and rumbling. "Father wants me to intimidate them with a dramatic aerial entrance?" Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "The Emperor believes your unique perspective might be valuable in these negotiations." Zephyr finally turned around, his massive form casting shadows across the marble floor. Marcus was a small dragon, barely larger than a human, with nervous green scales that flickered when he was anxious. Right now, those scales were practically strobe lights. "My unique perspective," Zephyr repeated slowly. "You mean my inability to do the one thing that defines our species?" "Your Highness, perhaps we could discuss—" "No." Zephyr's voice carried the authority of royal blood. "Tell my father I'll be there shortly." And Marcus, "Stop trying to make my weakness sound like a strength." The throne room of Emperor Drakmorth was a masterpiece of intimidation. Carved from a single piece of black diamond, it rose 300 feet into the air. Ancient dragon bones decorated the walls, trophies from the Empire's early days when dragons fought each other for territory. The ceiling was open to the sky, allowing the Emperor to make dramatic entrances from above. Today, however, Emperor Drakmorth sat on his obsidian throne, his crimson scales gleaming in the artificial light. He was ancient even by dragon standards, over 1,000 years old, and his presence filled the room with barely contained power. His golden eyes, identical to his son's, tracked Zephyr's approach. The human delegation stood in the center of the vast space, looking impossibly small. There were 5 of them, dressed in simple blue uniforms. Zephyr had expected them to be trembling with fear, but they stood straight and calm. One of them, a woman with short brown hair, even seemed to be studying the architecture with interest. "Ah, Prince Zephyr," the Emperor's voice boomed through the chamber. "Allow me to present the human negotiation team. They've come to discuss the mining rights to the Andromeda sector." The lead human, a middle-aged man with gray hair, stepped forward and performed what Zephyr assumed was a human bow. "Your Imperial Majesty, Your Highness, I am Ambassador Chen. We're honored by this audience." Zephyr nodded curtly. He'd been briefed on the situation. The Andromeda sector contained vast deposits of quantum crystals, essential for faster-than-light travel. The humans wanted mining rights. The dragons traditionally would simply take what they wanted. But the galactic political situation had grown complicated in recent decades. "Ambassador," Zephyr said, his voice carefully modulated to avoid the subsonic frequencies that could harm humans. "Your proposal is ambitious. The Andromeda sector has been under dragon protection for 3 centuries. "Protection from what, Your Highness?" The woman with brown hair spoke up, ignoring the sharp look from Ambassador Chen. "Our surveys show no hostile life forms in that region." Emperor Drakmorth's eyes flashed dangerously. "Young human, you speak out of turn. In our court, only those of noble blood may address the prince directly." The woman's face flushed, but she held her ground. "Forgive me, Your Imperial Majesty. I meant no disrespect. I'm simply curious about the nature of this protection." Zephyr found himself intrigued despite his mood. Most beings, even other dragons, became submissive in his father's presence. This human woman was either very brave or very foolish. "What is your role in this delegation?" he asked her directly. Ambassador Chen quickly intervened. "Your Highness, this is Dr. Sarah Mitchell, our xenoarchaeologist. She sometimes forgets proper protocol in her enthusiasm for learning." "Xenoarchaeologist," Zephyr repeated. You study alien ruins? Dr. Mitchell nodded eagerly. I specialize in ancient civilizations, particularly those that achieved spaceflight. Your empire's history is fascinating. The transition from territorial conflicts to galactic expansion, the development of crystal-based technology, the integration of conquered species into your administrative structure. Enough, Emperor Drakmorth interrupted. We did not summon you here for a history lesson. But Zephyr held up a clawed hand. Actually, Father, I'd like to hear more. Dr. Mitchell, what do you know about dragonflight capabilities? The question surprised everyone in the room, including Zephyr himself. He wasn't sure why he'd asked it. Dr. Mitchell's eyes lit up. From our observations, dragonflight appears to be a combination of physical wing power and some form of gravitational manipulation. The mathematical impossibility of creatures, your size achieving sustained flight through wing power alone, suggests an innate ability to alter local gravitational fields. Zephyr felt something twist in his chest. An innate ability, something every dragon was born with except him. Fascinating theory, he said carefully. And what conclusions have you drawn about dragons who cannot fly? The room fell silent. Even the Emperor seemed taken aback by his son's direct reference to his condition. Dr. Mitchell looked confused. I wasn't aware that was possible, Your Highness. In all our studies of dragon physiology and history, we found no references to non-flying dragons. That's because such dragons don't survive long enough to be recorded, Zephyr said bitterly. They become shameful secrets hidden away until they can be forgotten. Emperor Drakmorth's voice carried a warning. Zephyr, but the damage was done. The human delegation now knew the Empire's greatest secret. The heir to the throne was flightless. Zephyr could see the calculation in Ambassador Chen's eyes, the political implications spinning through his mind. Dr. Mitchell, however, looked genuinely concerned. Your Highness, if I may ask, is this a recent injury or— It's nothing, Zephyr cut her off, suddenly regretting his openness. The negotiations are concluded for today. Marcus will escort you to your quarters. As the humans filed out, Dr. Mitchell lingered for a moment, her eyes meeting Zephyr's. There was something in her expression he couldn't identify. Not pity, not calculation, but something else entirely. Your Highness, she said quietly, sometimes the most important discoveries come from studying the exceptions, not the rules. Then she was gone, leaving Zephyr alone with his father's disapproving stare and a strange new feeling he couldn't quite name. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor to Zephyr's private chambers. He was reviewing intelligence reports about human military capabilities when a soft knock interrupted his concentration. Before he could respond, the door opened to reveal Dr. Sarah Mitchell, carrying a small device and looking determined. Dr. Mitchell, Zephyr said, rising from his desk. I don't recall scheduling a meeting. She had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. I may have convinced your guard that I was delivering an official diplomatic message, which technically I am. Zephyr found himself almost smiling, almost. And what message would that be? That your gravitational theory about dragonflight is wrong. The words hit him like a physical blow. Of all the things he'd expected her to say, that wasn't one of them. Excuse me? Dr. Mitchell activated the device in her hands, and a holographic display materialized between them. It showed complex mathematical equations and anatomical diagrams of dragon wing structures. I spent all night running calculations, she said, her voice gaining confidence as she fell into lecture mode. The gravitational manipulation theory doesn't hold up under close examination. If dragons could alter gravity fields, we'd detect massive energy signatures during flight. We don't. What we do see is something far more interesting. Zephyr stared at the hologram, trying to make sense of the data. What are you suggesting? I think dragons don't manipulate gravity at all. I think you manipulate space itself. The silence stretched between them. Zephyr had heard many theories about dragonflight over the years, from court scholars and foreign researchers alike. None of them had ever mattered because none of them could explain why he was different. Space manipulation, he said slowly, that's impossible. Even the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy can only achieve limited spatial distortion with massive technological arrays. Dr. Mitchell's eyes sparkled with the enthusiasm of a researcher on the verge of a breakthrough. Exactly. That's what makes it so remarkable. Dragons appear to have evolved a biological mechanism for something we can barely achieve with our best technology. She manipulated the hologram, zooming in on the wing bone structure. Look at these calcium deposits along the wing bones. At first glance, they appear to be simple reinforcement structures. But the pattern is too regular, too geometric. They form a natural crystalline matrix. Zephyr leaned closer despite himself. And you think this matrix creates localized spatial compression ahead of the dragon and expansion behind it? Essentially, you're surfing a wave through space-time itself. The wing movements aren't just for lift, they're for directing and controlling the spatial distortion. The theory was elegant, brilliant even. It was also completely useless to him. Dr. Mitchell, he said, straightening up. This is fascinating research, but I fail to see how it helps my situation. If your theory is correct, then I'm missing some fundamental biological component that other dragons possess. She shook her head vigorously. That's just it. I don't think you're missing anything. I think you're different. Before Zephyr could respond, she pulled out another device, a small scanner that she pointed at his wings. Would you mind if I took some readings? Non-invasive, I promise. Zephyr hesitated. Allowing an alien researcher to study his body felt like the ultimate admission of weakness. But something in her manner, her genuine scientific curiosity rather than pity, made him nod. Dr. Mitchell ran the scanner along his wing bones, frowning at the readouts. Remarkable. Your crystalline matrix is actually more complex than the patterns I've seen in other dragons. The geometric structures are more sophisticated, more densely packed. More complex? Zephyr couldn't hide his surprise. But if that's true, why can't I fly? Because, Dr. Mitchell said, her voice growing excited, I think your spatial manipulation abilities are so advanced that they're operating on a completely different level. While other dragons compress and expand space in relatively simple ways, your matrix might be creating quantum-level distortions. She turned to face him directly. Your Highness, what if you're not grounded because you lack the ability to fly? What if you're grounded because your ability is so powerful that you haven't learned to control it? The idea was absurd. If his abilities were more powerful, wouldn't that make flight easier, not impossible? Dr. Mitchell, he said carefully, that's a very creative theory. But has anyone ever tried to teach you to fly using techniques designed for spatial manipulation rather than traditional wing-based flight? The question stopped him cold. The answer was no, of course. Dragon flight instruction was based on thousands of years of tradition. Hatchlings learned by watching their parents, by instinct and practice. No one had ever approached it as a technical problem to be solved. Traditional methods obviously haven't worked, Dr. Mitchell continued. But if my theory is correct, you might need a completely different approach. One based on understanding the quantum mechanics of what you're trying to achieve. Zephyr walked to the window, looking out at the sky he'd never been able to claim. And you think you can develop such an approach? I think we can develop it together. You have the biological hardware and the lived experience of a dragon. I have the theoretical framework and the outsider's perspective. Neither of us can solve this alone. The offer hung in the air between them. Zephyr had spent 20 years accepting his limitations, building his identity around his grounded nature. The idea of hope felt dangerous, almost painful. Why? He asked without turning around. Why does this matter to you? Your delegation is here for mining rights, not to solve my personal problems. He heard her footsteps as she approached the window. Because, Your Highness, I've spent my career studying civilizations that achieve the impossible. And in every case, the breakthrough came from someone who thought differently, who approached old problems with new perspectives. She paused, and when she continued, her voice was softer. Also, because I know what it's like to be the one person who can't do what everyone else takes for granted. Zephyr turned to study her face. You're speaking from experience. I have a genetic condition that affects my inner ear, she said matter-of-factly. I can't handle the gravitational changes of faster-than-light travel. Do you know how embarrassing it is to be a xenoarchaeologist who gets violently sick every time she has to travel between star systems? Despite everything, Zephyr almost smiled. I imagine it's similar to being a dragon prince who can't fly. The point is, Dr. Mitchell said, we found workarounds. Medical treatments, modified ship systems, alternative travel methods. Sometimes the solution isn't overcoming your limitations. It's understanding them well enough to work with them instead of against them. The logic was sound, but Zephyr had been disappointed too many times to embrace hope easily. And if your theory is wrong, If we spend weeks or months on this project and achieve nothing, Dr. Mitchell grinned, then we'll have learned something new about dragon biology, and I'll have the most interesting research paper in xenoarchaeological history. But Your Highness, what if I'm right? Zephyr looked out at the sky again, then back at the determined human woman who had somehow convinced him to consider the impossible. Very well, Dr. Mitchell, but this research remains completely confidential. If word of this reaches my father or the court, understood completely, Your Highness. When would you like to begin? Zephyr realized that for the first time in years he was actually looking forward to tomorrow. We start at dawn, he said. And Dr. Mitchell? Call me Zephyr. If we're going to attempt the impossible together, we might as well do it as equals. The training began in the deepest levels of the palace, in chambers originally designed for storing ancient artifacts. Sarah had convinced Zephyr that privacy was essential, not just for his reputation, but for the experimental nature of their work. Traditional dragon flight training focuses on wing movement and instinct, Sarah explained, setting up her equipment in the vast stone chamber. But if my theory is correct, that's like trying to operate a quantum computer by hitting it with a hammer. Zephyr stretched his wings in the confined space, feeling ridiculous. So what do you propose instead? We start with meditation. Meditation? Zephyr's voice carried a note of disbelief. I'm a dragon, not a monk. Sarah looked up from her instruments with a patient smile. Dragons manipulate space-time with their minds, Zephyr. Your brain is the control interface for forces that human science can barely comprehend. We need to understand how that interface works before we can teach you to use it properly. She gestured to a smooth section of floor. Sit down, close your eyes, and try to feel the space around you. Not with your physical senses, but with whatever part of your mind controls spatial manipulation. Zephyr had never felt more foolish in his life, but he lowered himself to the floor and closed his eyes. I don't feel anything unusual. Don't try to feel something new, Sarah instructed. Try to notice something that's always been there. Something you've been ignoring or dismissing as unimportant. Minutes passed in silence. Zephyr was about to give up when he became aware of a strange sensation, like a low humming that existed somewhere between his conscious mind and his physical body. It was so faint he'd never noticed it before. Background noise that his brain had learned to filter out. There's something, he said slowly. It's very subtle. Describe it. It's like I can sense the edges of things, not their physical boundaries, but something else. The space they occupy? Sarah's voice grew excited. Yes, that's exactly what I hoped for. You're sensing spatial distortion. Every object with mass creates tiny ripples in space-time, and you can feel those ripples. Zephyr opened his eyes, startled. All dragons can do this? I don't think so. Most dragons probably only sense the distortions they create themselves during flight. But you're sensing ambient distortions, the ones created by everything around you. Your sensitivity is off the charts. She pulled out a small metal sphere and placed it on the floor several feet away. Close your eyes again and tell me what you sense about that object. Zephyr obeyed, focusing on the strange new awareness. It's small but dense. The space around it feels compressed somehow. Sarah moved the sphere to a different location without making any sound. And now, it's moved. About 3 feet to your left. Remarkable. You're essentially seeing through spatial echolocation. Sarah's voice was filled with scientific wonder. Zephyr, I think your abilities are so advanced that traditional flight training never even began to address what you're capable of. Over the following days, they developed a new understanding of Zephyr's capabilities. He could sense the position and movement of objects through their spatial distortions. With concentration, he could even detect the approach of other dragons by the space-time ripples they created during flight. Now comes the hard part, Sarah said on their 5th day of training, learning to create distortions instead of just sensing them. They started with small exercises. Sarah would place objects around the chamber, and Zephyr would try to influence their spatial environment. The first few attempts yielded nothing but frustration. I can feel the space around them, Zephyr said, his voice tight with concentration. But I don't know how to change it. Think of it like learning to move a muscle you've never used before, Sarah suggested. You know the muscle exists, but you have to discover the mental pathway that controls it. Hours turned into days. Zephyr learned to distinguish between different types of spatial distortion: compression, expansion, torsion, and more exotic variations that Sarah's instruments could detect, but human science couldn't yet classify. On the 10th day, something shifted. Zephyr was practicing his sensing exercises when he felt something new. A sense of connection between his mind and the space around a small crystal Sarah had placed across the room. Instead of just observing the crystal's spatial footprint, he found he could touch it, manipulate it. The crystal lifted 6 inches off the ground. Sarah's instruments went wild, beeping and flashing as they detected massive energy readings. But the crystal held steady in the air, supported by nothing but Zephyr's will. Incredible, Sarah breathed. You're not just creating spatial distortion, you're creating a stable distortion field. The energy readings are unlike anything I've ever seen. Zephyr gently lowered the crystal back to the floor, amazed by how natural the action had felt once he'd found the right mental pathway. How do I apply this to flight? He asked. That's the million-credit question, Sarah admitted. What you just did requires incredible precision and control. Flight would require you to create and maintain multiple distortion fields simultaneously, while moving and adjusting them in real time. They spent the next week working on basic field manipulation. Zephyr learned to create compression fields beneath objects to push them upward, expansion fields above them to pull them higher, and torsion fields to change their orientation. The work was exhausting. Each exercise left him mentally drained, as if he'd been solving complex mathematical equations for hours. But gradually his endurance improved, and the movements became more fluid. I think you're ready to try something bigger, Sarah said on their 18th day of training. She had him lie flat on his back in the center of the chamber. I want you to create a compression field beneath your entire body. Start gently. We're not trying to achieve flight yet, just lift. Zephyr closed his eyes and reached out with his newly discovered abilities. Creating a field large enough to encompass his entire body was like trying to play a symphony on an instrument he'd only just learned to tune. The first attempt produced nothing but a headache. The second managed to lift his tail slightly off the ground before the field collapsed. The third, Zephyr felt himself rising. Not far, perhaps a foot off the ground, but unmistakably, undeniably rising. The sensation was completely different from what he'd expected flight to feel like. There was no sense of wind resistance or wing effort. Instead, he felt as if the ground itself was gently pushing him away while something above pulled him upward. Zephyr. Sarah's voice was awed. Open your eyes. He did, and found himself floating parallel to the ground, suspended in midair by nothing but his own will. The sensation was intoxicating. How long can you maintain this? Sarah asked. I don't know. It's not as difficult as I expected. The field felt stable, self-sustaining once he'd established the proper mental framework. Try rotating slowly. Don't break the field. Just adjust its orientation. Zephyr carefully shifted his mental focus and found himself turning in the air like a leaf caught in a gentle breeze. The control was absolute, precise beyond anything he'd dreamed possible. Sarah, he said, his voice filled with wonder. I think I'm actually flying. But even as he said it, Zephyr knew this was just the beginning. Hovering in a controlled environment was one thing. True flight, with speed, maneuverability, and the freedom to soar among the clouds, would require mastery of techniques they hadn't even begun to explore. Still, for the first time in his life, the sky didn't seem impossible. It seemed like a destination he might actually reach. Word of Zephyr's unusual training sessions had somehow reached the ears of Marcus, his nervous advisor. The small dragon appeared in the training chamber on their 23rd day, his green scales flickering with anxiety. Your Highness, Marcus said carefully, not looking at Zephyr, who was suspended 3 feet above the ground in a complex rotating meditation pose. Your father requests your immediate presence in the war room. Zephyr gently lowered himself to the floor, the spatial distortion field dissolving with practiced ease. What's the situation? The sector fleet reports unusual activity near the Andromeda region, Marcus replied, his eyes darting nervously to Sarah, who was packing up her equipment. Military scouts, possibly Terran. Sarah looked up sharply. That's impossible. The human delegation is still here. We wouldn't send scouts while conducting formal negotiations. Marcus's scales shifted to a more pronounced shade of green. Nevertheless, Dr. Mitchell, the fleet reports 3 ships of human design conducting detailed scans of the quantum crystal deposits. Zephyr felt a chill that had nothing to do with the stone chamber's temperature. Rogue elements? Unknown, Your Highness. Emperor Drakmorth has called for a full military briefing. The war room was a testament to dragon military might. Holographic displays showed the positions of every ship in the Imperial fleet, with real-time tactical data streaming in from across the galaxy. Emperor Drakmorth stood at the center of it all, his massive form radiating controlled fury. "Ah, Zephyr," the Emperor said without turning around. "How convenient that you're spending time with our human guests. Perhaps Dr. Mitchell can explain why her people are conducting unauthorized surveys of our territory." Sarah stepped forward, her diplomatic training evident in her calm demeanor despite the hostile atmosphere. "Your Imperial Majesty, I assure you that the Earth Alliance has authorized no such mission. These scouts, if they exist, are not operating under official orders." "If they exist?" General Korvax, the Emperor's chief military advisor, let out a rumbling laugh. "Human. We have sensor data showing 3 ships systematically mapping our mining operations." The holographic display shifted to show long-range sensor readings from the Andromeda sector. 3 small vessels, clearly of human design, were indeed conducting detailed scans of the crystal deposits. Sarah studied the data with growing confusion. "I don't recognize those ship configurations. They're not standard Earth Alliance designs." "Perhaps," Emperor Drakmorth said, his voice dangerously low, "your government is not as unified as you claim." Zephyr watched the exchange with growing unease. Something about the situation felt wrong. The timing was too convenient, the discovery too clean. "Father," he said, stepping into the conversation, "what was the source of this intelligence?" General Korvax answered instead. "Long-range patrol vessel Dragon's Breath detected the intrusion during routine border surveillance. And the patrol vessel's crew? Captain Thane and his squadron. Experienced officers, completely reliable." Zephyr knew Captain Thane. The Dragon was competent but ambitious, with strong opinions about human expansion into Dragon territory. He was also one of the most vocal critics of the current negotiations. "Dr. Mitchell," Zephyr said carefully, "if these ships are not Alliance vessels, who else might have access to human technology?" Sarah frowned, her mind clearly working through possibilities. "There are several human colonies that operate with minimal Alliance oversight. Some corporate interests that might act independently and—" She paused, looking troubled. "And?" Emperor Drakmorth demanded. "There are persistent rumors about black market technology sales. Some human manufacturers might be selling ship designs to non-human interests." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. If other species had access to human technology, the strategic balance of the galaxy could be shifting in ways none of them had anticipated. "General Korvax," Zephyr said, "I want detailed sensor logs from the Dragon's Breath, not just summary reports. And I want an independent verification patrol sent to the Andromeda sector." The general's eyes flashed with irritation. "Your Highness, with respect, Captain Thane's report is sufficient." "No," Zephyr interrupted, letting his royal authority ring in his voice. "If we're going to accuse our negotiating partners of treaty violations, we need absolute certainty." Emperor Drakmorth studied his son with interest. "You suspect deception?" "I suspect incomplete information," Zephyr replied diplomatically. "And I suggest we avoid any precipitous military action until we have complete intelligence." The Emperor nodded slowly. "Very well. General, arrange for the verification patrol. Dr. Mitchell, you will remain under palace guard until this situation is resolved." As the meeting dispersed, Sarah caught Zephyr's attention with a subtle gesture. They needed to talk privately. Later that evening, Zephyr found Sarah in the palace's observation deck, staring out at the stars. 2 dragon guards flanked the entrances, but they were far enough away to allow quiet conversation. "You think someone is trying to sabotage the negotiations," Sarah said without preamble. "The timing is suspiciously convenient," Zephyr agreed. "Just as our talks were progressing, suddenly there's evidence of human betrayal." Sarah turned to face him. "Zephyr, there's something I haven't told you about my real mission here." Zephyr felt his stomach tighten. "Go on. The mining rights are important, yes. But they're not the main reason I'm here." Sarah's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Earth Alliance intelligence has detected signs of a massive military buildup in this sector. Ships disappearing, resources being diverted, communication blackouts in key systems. You're spying on us?" "We're trying to understand what's happening," Sarah corrected. "Because the patterns don't match Dragon expansion strategies. This looks like someone is preparing for a major war, but using techniques that are completely alien to Dragon military doctrine." Zephyr processed this information, feeling pieces of a larger puzzle clicking into place. And now mysterious ships with human technology appeared just as negotiations reach a critical point. Someone wants the Earth Alliance and the Dragon Empire to view each other as threats, Sarah concluded. But who benefits from a war between our peoples? Before Zephyr could answer, an alarm began sounding throughout the palace. Emergency lights bathed the observation deck in red, and the guards immediately moved to escort Sarah to a secure location. "What's happening?" she asked. Marcus burst through the door, his scales practically glowing with panic. "Your Highness! The verification patrol has been attacked. 3 ships destroyed. Captain Vex critically injured. The attackers used human weapons, but their tactics were completely unfamiliar." Zephyr felt the last pieces of the puzzle falling into place. Someone was using human technology and dragon intelligence to play both sides against each other. But the attack on the verification patrol meant they were moving beyond subtle manipulation into direct action. "Marcus, has my father been informed?" "He's mobilizing the fleet, Your Highness. Full military alert across all sectors." Zephyr looked at Sarah, seeing his own realization reflected in her eyes. They were running out of time. In hours, possibly minutes, 2 of the galaxy's most powerful civilizations could be at war based on manufactured evidence. "Sarah," he said quietly, "how quickly can you contact Earth Alliance Command?" "Not quickly enough to stop what's coming," she replied grimly. Zephyr made a decision that would have seemed impossible just weeks before. "Then we'll have to stop it ourselves." "How?" "We're going to find those mysterious ships and discover who's really behind this. And we're going to do it before my father's fleet reaches the Andromeda sector." Sarah stared at him. "Zephyr, that would require flying to the Andromeda sector. Even for a fully capable dragon, that's a journey of several hours." "Then it's fortunate," Zephyr said with a grim smile, "that we've been working on making me fully capable." The plan was desperate and dangerous. Zephyr had never attempted flight beyond the controlled environment of the training chamber, let alone the kind of high-speed, long-distance journey required to reach the Andromeda sector before his father's fleet arrived. "This is insane," Sarah said as they prepared in Zephyr's private chambers. "You've been learning to fly for less than a month. Interstellar travel requires precision navigation, sustained energy output, and combat readiness. Do you have a better suggestion?" Zephyr asked, strapping a communication device to his forearm. "My father's fleet will reach Andromeda in 6 hours. If they find evidence of human ships attacking dragon patrols, there won't be any negotiating afterward." Sarah checked her portable scanner one last time. "The energy readings from your training sessions suggest you're capable of much more than basic flight. But we don't know your limits, and there won't be time for gradual testing." "Then we'll discover my limits together," Zephyr said grimly. "Are you ready?" Sarah secured her breathing apparatus and emergency beacon. Dragon-back flight at interstellar speeds was dangerous for humans, but their portable life support system would keep her alive during the journey. They made their way to the palace's highest launch platform, a crystalline spire that extended above the atmosphere. Traditional dragon launches happened here, where the thin air offered less resistance and the view was unobstructed. Zephyr stood at the platform's edge, looking out at the star field ahead. Somewhere among those distant points of light, a conspiracy was unfolding that could plunge the galaxy into war. "Remember," Sarah said, settling into the specialized harness they'd improvised, "this isn't about flying like other dragons. You're not manipulating air currents or using gravitational lift. You're literally folding space around us." Zephyr nodded, closing his eyes and reaching out with his spatial awareness. The sensation was overwhelming at first. The vast emptiness of space punctuated by the gravitational signatures of distant stars and planets. He could feel the location they needed to reach, a faint distortion pattern marking the Andromeda sector. "I can sense the destination," he said. "But the distance—" "Don't think about the distance," Sarah instructed. "Think about the space between here and there. You're not traveling through that space, you're compressing it, making the journey shorter." Zephyr had never attempted anything on this scale, but the theory made sense. Instead of moving his body across vast distances, he would bring his destination closer to him. He spread his wings and stepped off the platform. The sensation was unlike anything he'd experienced during training. The moment he left the platform, Zephyr felt his spatial manipulation abilities engage on a level that dwarfed his previous efforts. The space around him didn't just distort, it folded, compressed and reformed according to his will. Stars that had been distant points of light suddenly appeared close enough to touch. The journey that should have taken hours was compressed into minutes as space itself bent to accommodate his passage. Zephyr. Sarah's voice was awed despite the communication static. The energy readings are off the charts. You're not just flying, you're rewriting local space-time geometry. The Andromeda sector materialized around them with startling suddenness. One moment they were crossing empty space. The next they were approaching the quantum crystal fields that had sparked the original negotiations. There, Sarah pointed to a cluster of objects near the largest crystal formation. 3 ships just like the sensor reports indicated. Zephyr adjusted their trajectory, his spatial manipulation allowing for precise maneuvering that would have been impossible with traditional flight. As they drew closer, the ships became clearly visible. They were indeed human in design, but something was wrong with them. The hull configurations were slightly off, the weapon placements subtly different from standard Earth Alliance specifications. Those aren't human ships, Sarah said, studying them through her scanner. The basic design is human, but the modifications… Zephyr, those are Dragon upgrades. What do you mean? Look at the weapon systems. Those are crystalline energy cannons, Dragon technology, and the hull plating. That's not human metallurgy. Someone has taken human ship designs and rebuilt them with Dragon technology. The implications were staggering. Someone had access to both human and Dragon technology and was using hybrid ships to impersonate both sides in the conflict. We need to get closer, Zephyr said. If we can identify who's operating those ships… Incoming! Sarah shouted, her scanners detecting energy signatures from the hybrid vessels. The attack came without warning. Crystalline energy beams lanced through space where they'd been floating moments before. Zephyr's spatial awareness kicked in, and he found himself dodging attacks by folding space around their trajectory. They know we're here, he said, maneuvering behind a large crystal formation for cover. Zephyr, I'm detecting Dragon life signs aboard those ships, but the vessels themselves are broadcasting human identification codes. Dragons flying human ships with Dragon weapons. Zephyr mused grimly. Someone is playing both sides' very sophisticated game. Another barrage of energy beams forced them to relocate. Zephyr was discovering that his spatial manipulation abilities made him incredibly difficult to target. He could essentially teleport short distances by compressing space to 0. Can you get us close enough for detailed scans? Sarah asked. I can do better than that, Zephyr replied. I can get us aboard one of those ships. That's suicide. We don't know how many crew members they have or what their orders are. We need proof of who's behind this conspiracy, Zephyr pointed out. Sensor readings won't be enough to convince my father or your Alliance command. Before Sarah could object further, Zephyr compressed the space between them and the nearest hybrid vessel. The transition was instantaneous. One moment they were floating among the crystal formations. The next they were inside the ship's cargo bay. The vessel's interior was a bizarre mixture of human and Dragon technology. Human-style corridors had been widened to accommodate Dragon forms, while Dragon crystal matrices had been integrated into human computer systems. Incredible, Sarah whispered, scanning the hybrid technology. This level of integration would require years of collaborative development. But no official partnership between our peoples exists, voices echoed from the ship's forward sections. Dragon voices speaking in the ancient formal dialect reserved for military operations. Confirmed. The human delegate's presence in Sector 7. The prince appears to be personally escorting her. Excellent. When the Emperor discovers his son's apparent collaboration with human spies, the negotiation collapse will seem completely natural. Zephyr felt ice form in his veins. Someone had been tracking their movements, planning to use his presence here as evidence of treason or collaboration. This goes deeper than sabotage, he whispered to Sarah. Someone is planning to destroy both the negotiations and my relationship with my father. But who benefits from a Dragon civil war in addition to a human-Dragon conflict? Before Zephyr could answer, footsteps approached the cargo bay. Heavy Dragon footsteps, accompanied by the distinctive energy signatures of multiple crystalline weapons. They were about to get their answer, whether they wanted it or not. The cargo bay door slid open to reveal 3 dragons in modified armor that combined human and Dragon technologies, but it was the lead dragon that made Zephyr's blood run cold. General Korvac stepped into the cargo bay, his dark scales gleaming with embedded crystalline enhancements. Behind him stood Captain Thane and another dragon Zephyr didn't recognize. "Prince Zephyr," General Korvac said with mock surprise. "How unexpected to find you here. And with the human spy, no less." "Korvax," Zephyr replied, his voice steady despite the shock. "I should have known you were behind this conspiracy." The general's laugh rumbled through the cargo bay. "Conspiracy? My dear Prince, I prefer to think of it as necessary political evolution. Your father's obsession with peaceful coexistence with inferior species was leading our empire toward weakness." Sarah stepped forward, her scanner still recording. "You're the one who's been building hybrid vessels. How long have you been planning this? Dr. Mitchell, isn't it?" Korvax's eyes glittered with amusement. "Your species' technology has been useful, I'll admit. But surely you understand that this galaxy is too small for both dragons and humans to prosper." Captain Thane spoke up, his voice filled with zealous conviction. "The General has shown us the future, Your Highness. Dragon purity, dragon supremacy across all sectors. No more negotiations with weaklings, no more shared territories." Zephyr felt the pieces of the conspiracy falling into place. "You've been stealing human technology to create false flag operations, making it look like humans are attacking dragons while using dragon weapons to attack human installations." "Crude but effective," Korvax agreed. "Though I must say your unprecedented arrival here has provided an unexpected opportunity. When your father discovers that his grounded son somehow learned to fly just in time to secretly meet with human agents, he'll assume I've been working with them all along." Zephyr finished grimly. "The implications are delicious," Korvax continued. "Either the prince has been conducting treasonous negotiations, or the humans have somehow given him flying abilities in exchange for classified information. Either way, it destroys both the current negotiations and your position as heir." Sarah's face was pale, but her voice remained steady. "And with the prince discredited and war inevitable, you position yourself as the Emperor's most trusted advisor, eventually perhaps as his successor." "The good doctor understands politics," Korvax said approvingly, "though she won't live long enough to appreciate the subtlety of the plan." The third dragon raised his weapon, but Zephyr was already moving. His spatial manipulation abilities kicked in, and suddenly the entire cargo bay seemed to fold in on itself. Gravity shifted, walls became floors, and the carefully aimed energy beams went wild. "Run!" Zephyr shouted to Sarah as he compressed space to create a path toward the ship's exit. But Korvax was prepared for unusual tactics. He activated a device on his armor, and suddenly the air filled with a high-pitched whine that made Zephyr's head feel like it was splitting apart. "Spatial distortion dampener," Korvax explained as Zephyr staggered. "We've been studying your training sessions for weeks, Prince. Did you think your secret experiments with the human were actually secret?" The pain was overwhelming. Whatever the device was doing, it was interfering with Zephyr's ability to manipulate space-time. His carefully controlled fields collapsed, and he found himself back to being a grounded dragon in a very dangerous situation. Captain Thane moved to capture Sarah, but she surprised everyone by pulling out a small device of her own. "EMP burst in 3 seconds, she announced. "I suggest everyone hold on to something solid." "Impossible," Korvax snarled. "We scanned you for weapons." The electromagnetic pulse hit the ship like a hammer blow. Every piece of technology in the cargo bay went dark, including Korvax's spatial dampener. Emergency lighting flickered on, but most of the ship's systems were offline. Zephyr felt his abilities return with a rush of relief. But before he could act, Sarah grabbed his arm. "We need to get back to the capital immediately," she said urgently. "I managed to record Korvax's confession, but the EMP wiped most of the ship's computer systems. They'll destroy any remaining evidence and claim we sabotaged their vessel. They'll also contact other conspirators," Zephyr realized. "This operation is bigger than just these 3 ships." Korvax was already shouting orders to his subordinates, trying to restore power and communications. In minutes, the ship would be operational again and their window of escape would close. Zephyr gathered Sarah in his arms and reached out with his spatial senses. The journey back to the capital would be even more challenging than their arrival, because now they were racing against time and carrying evidence that could prevent a galactic war. "Hold tight," he told Sarah. "This trip is going to be rougher than the first one." He folded space around them and launched into the void, compressing distance with desperate urgency. Behind them, the hybrid ships were already powering up their engines. But Zephyr's spatial manipulation gave him a crucial advantage. He could travel in directions that didn't technically exist. "Zephyr," Sarah said as they crossed impossible distances in heartbeats. "When we get back, Korvax will deny everything. He'll claim we're the conspirators, that we destroyed evidence to cover our tracks. Then we'll need more than just your recording," Zephyr replied, pushing his abilities to their limits. "We'll need proof that even my father can't ignore." "What kind of proof?" Zephyr smiled grimly as the capital world appeared ahead of them. "The kind that involves showing everyone exactly what a dragon with unlimited spatial manipulation abilities can really do." As they approached the palace, Zephyr could see the signs of military mobilization. His father's fleet was preparing for departure, ready to turn the Andromeda incident into the opening battle of an unnecessary war. But now Zephyr had allies, evidence, and most importantly, the power to make himself heard in a way that no one, not even the Emperor, could ignore. The final confrontation was about to begin, and for the first time in his life, Zephyr was flying toward it instead of watching from the ground. Zephyr's arrival at the palace created exactly the kind of spectacle he'd hoped to avoid his entire life. His spatial manipulation abilities allowed him to materialize directly in the main courtyard, bypassing all security and appearing in a flash of distorted light that sent guards scrambling and courtiers fleeing. Emperor Drakmorth emerged from the palace within minutes, his massive form radiating fury and confusion in equal measure. "Zephyr," the Emperor's voice boomed across the courtyard. "Explain yourself. How are you flying? And why are you returning from unauthorized travel with the human prisoner?" "Father," Zephyr said, gently setting Sarah down but keeping his spatial fields active around them. "Dr. Mitchell isn't a prisoner, and I have urgent information about the Andromeda incident. You were ordered to remain in the palace during the crisis," Emperor Drakmorth continued, his golden eyes blazing. "Instead, you somehow acquired flight capabilities and disappeared with an alien spy. The fleet reports that you sabotaged their investigation ships." "The fleet reports are lies," Zephyr interrupted, his voice carrying across the courtyard with enough force to silence the growing crowd of observers. "General Korvax has been conducting false flag operations using hybrid vessels to simulate attacks by both human and dragon forces." Emperor Drakmorth's expression shifted from anger to dangerous uncertainty. "That's a serious accusation, my son. Do you have proof?" Sarah stepped forward, activating her recording device. "We have General Korvax's confession, Your Imperial Majesty." He admitted to orchestrating the attacks and planning to use them to destroy both the peace negotiations and Prince Zephyr's position as heir. The recording played across the courtyard, Korvax's voice clearly audible as he outlined his conspiracy. The assembled crowd listened in stunned silence as the general described his plans for dragon supremacy and his manipulation of both human and dragon forces. "This could be fabricated," Emperor Drakmorth said when the recording finished, though his voice lacked conviction. "Then let's get additional confirmation," Zephyr replied. He reached out with his spatial senses, searching for the unique energy signatures of the hybrid vessels. "Father, I can bring one of Korvax's ships here right now for your personal inspection." "Impossible. The Andromeda sector is hours away, even by dragonflight." "Not for me." Zephyr compressed space around himself and Sarah, then expanded his manipulation field to encompass a volume large enough to contain one of the hybrid vessels. The energy requirements were enormous, pushing his abilities beyond anything he'd attempted before. But the conspiracy had to be exposed. The ship materialized in the courtyard with a thunderous crash, its hull scarred by their earlier encounter. Dragons scattered as the massive hybrid vessel settled onto the crystalline pavement. "Behold," Zephyr announced, his voice carrying the authority of absolute certainty. "A vessel bearing human design elements but powered by dragon crystal matrices. Notice the weapon systems. They can fire both human energy signatures and dragon flame patterns, depending on which side Korvax wanted to frame." Emperor Drakmorth approached the ship, his experienced eye taking in the technological hybridization. "This is unprecedented. The level of integration would require years of secret development," Sarah finished. "Your Imperial Majesty, this conspiracy goes far beyond General Korvax. Someone has been stealing technology from both our peoples and using it to manipulate us into war." The Emperor studied the ship's hull, then turned to face his son, Zephyr, your flight capabilities, how? Dr. Mitchell helped me understand that my spatial manipulation abilities were far more advanced than anyone realized. Zephyr explained. I wasn't grounded because I lacked the ability to fly. I was grounded because my abilities were so powerful that traditional training methods couldn't teach me to control them. And you learned this from a human? The Emperor's voice carried a mixture of wonder and something that might have been pride. I learned it by working with someone who approached the problem from a completely different perspective. Zephyr corrected. Someone who saw possibilities instead of limitations. A commotion at the courtyard entrance interrupted their conversation. General Korvac strode through the crowd, flanked by a squadron of loyal guards. His armor gleamed with crystalline enhancements and his bearing radiated confidence. Your Imperial Majesty, Korvac said, performing a perfect military salute. I've returned from the Andromeda sector with disturbing news. Prince Zephyr and the human spy destroyed our investigation vessels and stole classified technology. General, Emperor Drakmorth's voice was deadly quiet. How did you return from Andromeda so quickly? Korvac hesitated for just a moment. Advanced propulsion systems, Your Majesty. We've been developing new technologies. The same technologies that allowed you to build hybrid ships for your false flag operations? Zephyr interrupted. Your Highness, I don't know what lies the human has filled your head with. But you won't know lies, General. Sarah activated a second recording device, one that had been hidden in her equipment pack. We also recorded your conversation with Captain Thane about framing the prince for treason. The second recording played, capturing Korvac's detailed explanation of how he planned to use Zephyr's presence at Andromeda to discredit both the prince and the peace negotiations. The courtyard fell silent as the implications sank in. General Korvac had not only committed treason against the Empire, but had planned to destroy the imperial succession and plunge the galaxy into war for his own political advancement. Guards. Emperor Drakmorth's voice carried absolute authority. Arrest General Korvac and his co-conspirators. Charge them with high treason, conspiracy against the crown, and acts of war against allied species. Korvac's hand moved toward his weapon, but Zephyr was faster. Space folded around the general, creating a compression field that held him immobile. Don't make this worse for yourself, Zephyr advised, maintaining the spatial restraint with effortless precision. As the guard secured Korvac and his subordinates, Emperor Drakmorth turned to address the assembled crowd. Citizens of the Empire, his voice boomed across the courtyard and beyond, carried by the palace's communication systems. Today we have uncovered a conspiracy that sought to destroy our negotiations with the Human Alliance and plunge our galaxy into unnecessary war. This conspiracy was defeated by the cooperation between my son, Prince Zephyr, and Dr. Sarah Mitchell of the Earth Alliance. He paused, his gaze finding Zephyr and Sarah among the crowd. Let this be remembered. Strength comes not from isolation and supremacy, but from understanding and cooperation. The prince's newfound abilities were unlocked not through dragon tradition alone, but through the insights of an ally who saw what we had missed. The crowd erupted in cheers, but Zephyr barely heard them. He was looking at Sarah, who was smiling with the satisfaction of a scientist whose theories had been proven correct. So, she said quietly, what happens now? Now, Zephyr replied, his spatial awareness already reaching out toward the stars. We finish the negotiations. And then, if you're interested, we continue exploring what other impossible things might be possible when dragons and humans work together. Sarah's smile grew wider. I think I'd like that very much. Above them, the sky stretched endlessly in all directions, no longer a barrier but an invitation. For the first time in his life, Prince Zephyr looked up at the stars and saw not limits, but possibilities as infinite as space itself. The dragon who couldn't fly had become the dragon who could fold space and time to his will. And he'd done it not by overcoming his limitations, but by learning to see them as the first step toward something greater than anyone had imagined possible.